Everyone, what's up? Welcome back. I'm Heath, and today we are diving into an as voted by you episode of dubstep and drum and bass design using only Ableton Live's stock plugins. No Serum, no Pigments, just the tools you already have, and we're building growling basses, wobbling basses, and those kind of chest rattling sounds that make these genres hit nice and hard. I'll show you why you don't need expensive synths to make professional bass. And so crank up the volume, drop your questions in the chat like always, and let's get these bass lines pushing some air. Without further ado, let's jump in. So as always on these streams, we like to test things out first. So let's make sure everything's working fine. That is microphone levels and also music levels. So let's have a little spin of kind of a preview of what we're making today. Right, so there's a little taster. Everything looks good at this end. Sound-wise, everything seems to be working fine. So as we get stuck into the stream, get our heads down and get working, do let me know if any levels need to be different to how they are. So let's start with how this stream came about, because I'm sure that's going to be interesting for some of you. We'll have a quick talk about that. I posted earlier in the week on my YouTube community page some suggestions, just asking you guys and girls, to let me know what you would like to see. And I listed off 4 different points of things that I thought about. The why, 25 years of DJing and producing has taught me what matters. Sound design, let's get weird and make something unique. Exploring a genre, what do we need to make that genre happen? Or a track idea from scratch. And I had 2 comments, and one of those is what I've chosen to do today, which was by the good old Dr. Bones Tunes, who's a subscriber here. And by the way, I'll keep that thread going. So if you watch this video replay live and you want to add your own suggestion, I'm always reading those. I'm always open to those. Drop them in there. And if it's something I can do on the channel, I will do so. So thank you to Dr. Bones Tunes, who wrote, "Workflow, making dubstep type bass sounds with Ableton stock devices. I can't afford Serum or Pigments." That's great, because really at the end of the day, not all of us can afford those plugins, right? And so the goal of today's stream is kind of to have a good old look at what we've got inside of Ableton and what we can do with those synths and do some sound design. So let's get started, and let's begin with a drift instrument, but from scratch. So we're going to not use anything here that's already set up. So let's get a brand new MIDI track in play, and let's grab ourselves a drift, and we'll begin there with some sound design. And yes, it's going to be a warts and all kind of session. So there's lots of sort of, tweaking of macros and working away at getting the right sound, but hopefully you'll learn and find it beneficial as we go through that. What we might also do, we can use the bass patch from the other demo version, which is just a little bass line riff, as you can see down here. But we could also maybe kick off a new one as well, and let's just make it maybe just a sustained note for a second, make it very, very basic. And we're not going to have it that high, so we're going to bring it down maybe an octave or so. Let's just play it from there. And what we might do is we might do a pitch bend on that note just to make it a little bit more interesting right off the bat. So we'll go to MIDI effects, and sometimes I like to do it this way. We can do it internally in the envelopes, but sometimes if you're wanting to automate things as well, you can kind of grab this CC control device from the Ableton Live library in the MIDI effects, and it's got a pitch bend macro here, which is quite nice. So you can just tap on that, and then you can go into here and into the envelopes. Straight away we've got it here, and then we can just kind of like get a pitch bend ramp happening. And yeah, I'm just gonna do that again. Just want a point obviously at the start, and then a second point somewhere over here. I'm just going to bring that down, and I'm just going to dial it in by ear a bit. Something like that. We can go back and adjust it in a little bit, so that just gives us a little bit of a bendy kind of bend to our notes here. So then over to drift. What are we going to do with drift? Well, we're going to start by making it like really basic to begin with. So we're going to basically turn it into an initialized patch. There's no preset here, but we're going to even make it more simplified so that you're going to join me as I build from zero this drift, right? And so what we're going to do is work our way around the synth, sort of turning a few things off and changing a few things. So let's start over here with the oscillators. And let's take oscillator 2 and bring the volume all the way to 0 or nothing at all. Let's go next door to that, to this filter section, and let's take both the modulation sections and bring those to 0. So you can kind of just double click in there, zero those out, right? And then we're going to work our way along. Let's come over to probably what's next. We're going to also take the velocity to volume off, right? And that's connected to, right now, when I kind of play different velocities on my keyboard, this is affecting the volume. If I zero that out as well, or bring it down to 0, that isn't. So we've got a nice constant same velocity each time I'm tapping the note. And I think that's good when you're making a patch like this. And also when we're making a patch like this, I'm going to show you the way I like to work, where we build up the patch from essentially make the synth do as much as it can do before you start seeing me adding lots of effects behind the device to finish the sound off. So we're going to think of it like a lemon. We're going to squeeze as much juice of it out of it as we can, and then we will come over and start adding effects. So velocity volume to 0, zeroing out the 2 frequency modulation boxes, oscillator 2 around to nothing, so we've turned that off effectively. Then we're going to go to the main envelope, envelope 1. This is the volume or amp envelope. I'm going to bring the sustain all the way up, and we're going to bring the release in a little bit. So let's have a listen to our note. And if you make the release too short, you might get a click. So you might need to leave just a little bit of release there, but you can always fine tune that in a little bit. Let's also bring around in a second our filter frequency, but before we do that, what we're going to do is quite a bit of work with this envelope 2 here in the drift. And it doesn't look too bad already, but what we're going to do is change it slightly. We're going to bring the sustain to the bottom, and we're going to slow down this attack quite a bit. But before we do that, what we're going to do is bring our filter frequency around, so we're not going to hear anything now, right? And then what we're going to do is over here in that frequency mod, even though we zeroed it out, it's good to see, we could have left it because we are going to use envelope 2 here, which is already set up by default, but zeroing it out, it just means you get this kind of workflow from the very basics and understand what I'm doing here. So now I'm going to bring that up to 100. And as you can see, it kind of defaults to a plucky envelope. So if you're wanting to make plucks, great, but we're kind of looking for something a bit different. We're looking for a bit of a wub or something here. So let's slow our attack a bit. Right, and we start to get that. And we're also going to move the decay. So we'll be dialing that in a little bit to taste, but that's given us sort of more of a wub. And if you want even more of a wub, you can keep changing this attack here, right, along with the decay. So that's applied the filter envelope 2 100% to the filter frequency cutoff. So we've got this opening of the filter there. That's great. Everything else is in pretty good shape. Now the tricky stuff starts, or not tricky, but where this drift becomes like a dubstep or drum and bass type bass line is by using a little trick here with the LFO section. And the LFO of drift is interesting because it gives us some usual characters in, we can have frequency of the rate be in frequency, we can note sync, we can have it, frequency, we can have it in milliseconds, we can have it synced to our clock or note synced, and then we can have this ratio over here of 1:1, and that's what we're going to choose. And that basically means that if we apply this LFO ratio to something, we can kind of get FM synthesis happening here. We can modulate the frequency or pitch of the synth, the note, the oscillator. So we're going to do that. We're going to switch it to 1 to 1. And then crucially, what we're going to do is come over here to the main part of the drift over here. And where we've got pitch modulation, envelope 2 and LFO, we're going to bring up the LFO amount to bring this ratio and this modulation into play. Right, and we already start to get that kind of nasty right, just simulating a bit of wobble on the filter cutoff there. So we start to get that tone we're looking for, that raspy kind of tone. And so now what we can do is play around with the ratio amount here, which is just at its default of 1. So let's start doing that a little bit. Right, and what you can do then is work between these two amounts, how much of that LFO is being applied to the pitch modulation and the ratio amount. And I would recommend that when you move the ratio amount, that you do look out for not leaving it at decimal points like 4.38, because they will tend to sound more out of tune than it will by going for whole numbers. So if you put the ratio into a whole number, things are going to sound more pleasant. If you want something a little bit more wonky and out of tune, you can try the decimal points, but so far we've got the basics of that. And now we can also tweak. Right, so now we're going to carry on with more modulation. That's just given us that sort of like basic kind of, again, sort of starting point. I'm happy with that. I'm going to bring up a bit of resonance on my filter as well. Let's do that. Let's also bring in the high pass part of the filter. So let's bring that up. And then if we open the filter, you can see what I've done, right? So I've got this now filter at the bottom, cutting away a bit of the lows. So we've now got that in play. So we've got some good sort of starting points here, right? And so with this high pass filter that we've now opened up and we have in play, what we can do a bit with that is come on over to the modulation. And this envelope 2 I spoke about earlier, that is currently working on the filter frequency cutoff, it's kind of something we can use to do other jobs as well. So what we're going to do is pop over to the modulation tab, and at the very top here, we can see we've already got the high pass frequency as the first option in the mod tab here. And we're just going to say envelope 2 is now assigned to that. So not only is it adjusting the frequency filter cutoff, it's now also adjusting the other part of the filter. Right, and so if we play around with that a little bit, so you can also play around with the amount. So now this is connected, and it's getting a nice bit of movement from that same filter 2 envelope. So I think that's really cool. What else could we do in here? So we've got the amount of the LFO down here also. This is the amount of that sine wave, right? So if we're just playing our little patch idea again. So what we can also do is come to here where it can be modulated. So this amount, I was just doing it with the mouse, bringing my sine wave in and out. But again, that's affecting where this LFO is applied, which we know is applied to the pitch modulation over here. And so we could also say, how about we have something that's moving this a little bit in the background? So we leave it at, we come in here and we go envelope 2, and now we can bring in an amount of that. So once again, envelope 2 is playing a few roles now. If you follow the pathway, we set it up first to be this envelope, and then we've got it hard onto the filter frequency, mapped to the filter cutoff. We've got it modulating the high pass frequency here, and now we're bringing it into play to also adjust the amount of the rate of the LFO here, which is pretty cool. So let's have a listen to that. So we've got a nice kind of starting point here, and now we can start to sort of like evolve things. So I think we've got plenty of modulation going on. We've got our 2 envelopes set up, envelope 1 controlling the volume in the amp, envelope 2 doing lots of bits of modulation. We could also bring in something here to do some further modulation, but I think we're okay for now. We'll just leave that zeroed out. So what I might do now is play around with the oscillators a bit. So we've still just got oscillator 1 at the moment. So let's crank that up a bit. Nice. Let's bring in some shape. So we're going to modulate the shape of the sawtooth. And then what we can do here with our shape, again, you might have guessed it, if you're here in the stream watching as we're sound designing this drift dubstep drum and bass, because a lot of them can be very versatile. What do you think I'm going to modulate the shape macro with if you've been following along so far? Drop a comment in the chat. And also, by the way, if you have any questions, do drop them in the chat as we go. So basically, I'll give you a second in case someone wants to answer that. But literally, again, I can modulate this with any of those options, right? And so we've got this kind of theme that we've set up nicely here. So I didn't see anything pop up in the chat. That's fine. I'm going to go envelope 2, right? And so now this amount here is going to also use our friend envelope 2 to shape give a bit of modulation to the shape amount, as you can see. So now we can play around with the waveforms of the oscillator 1. That's pretty cool. We could pitch it. There we go. And then I think we're cooking along quite nicely here. So that's just oscillator 1, where we've kind of turned it up a bit louder. We've brought some shape in. We've modulated the shape with envelope 2, and I've pitched it down an octave, and I've changed the waveform. So similarly, oscillator 2's here. So now we could say, okay, what about layering it with the second oscillator? So let's turn it up. Again, we could try different waveforms. Detune it a little bit. Not too much, so it's not, again, out of tune. And then we could play around with the octave. That's pretty filthy. So I think we've almost got something here that's worth now kind of tweaking and evolving. And in the similar way to how I've pitched that oscillator down, so I just brought that down, we could also tune it to a musical interval. So sometimes if you wanted a bit like a power chord, this could be 7 semitones higher, and we'd get a bit more of a... And if we try our other bass pattern, now, I would say personally for me, given that this is just drift, no Serum, no Pigments, we're trying to do heavy lifting here with built-in Ableton devices, that is a pretty dope bass, and we've got no effects, and we've just spent a little bit of time kind of massaging this into the sound that we've got here, right? So once you've got a platform like we have, we can now start kind of messing around with that. So sometimes what you might do is kind of save this now, you know, so what might be actually a good idea. So let's go back to the single note. I think that's my favorite configuration over there. So what I'm going to do is a little trick here. Let's put like the drift into an instrument rack. Let's group it. And then what we could do is start kind of, you know, mapping some of these things to a macro that we kind of want to preserve. So, you know, you could go through, map these things to the macros, set up a snapshot. It would take me a little bit to go through the whole synth, but we could kind of map, you know, our parameters to different macros here. I'll just do a couple. And then what we could do is do a new snapshot, and that would preserve all of those settings that we've got here right now. And then we could literally, you know, go ahead and mangle it from there, always knowing that we can return and go to that snapshot and bring it back. But we're going to do it a different way. So let's say that's one way to do that. Another way I'm going to do actually is I'm going to do the drift, and I'm going to actually duplicate it. Then I'm just going to turn one off. So we're going to have two examples of it. Maybe I'll make this one white, and I'll just leave that one alone. It's going to stay how it was. And then this other one I'm going to mangle now into kind of working on it and developing it. And I'm going to return to lots of the things I started with. So let's start with envelope 2, given it's attached to lots of things. So I'm just moving where the shape of envelope 2, given that it's tied to lots of modulation in here, so changing that envelope shape gives you lots of new tones and timbres. The LFO being attached to the pitch and with this ratio setting is also really interesting. So what we can do with that now is play around with the different waveforms of the LFO, and this should give us some really interesting results, because I think we'll find maybe like a drum and bass style sound here with the saw up or saw down instead of the sine wave here. So let's mess with that a little bit. And some of those, the best ones in here, going away from the sine wave for me, are the saw up and saw downs. Some of the more crazier waveforms, they would require, of the LFO, they'd require me to sort of like play around a lot more with, you know, the different settings, whereas changing between, let's say, all of those first 4 or 5 standard sort of waveforms definitely already works with what I've got. So I'm going to stick with that. Right, and as you can see, no effects yet, right? So what have we got actually if we shoot this out? Yeah, so I like that. That's the kind of idea with the saw down over here. And by the way, if you are in the stream watching live with me, do feel free to drop a comment in there. I'm more than happy to answer your questions about Ableton Live, bass sound design, Ableton 12.3, it's here now. That's what I'm working in here. So if you have any specific questions about that, fire them in the chats here. So I think what we can do now is we can get rid of this other patch that was just showing you a way of how we could do that to make sure we preserve the first one, but I like where this has gone. And now what I'm going to do is add some effects to it. We've got all that far to where we are now with no effects whatsoever. And I've got some over here on this track that I think are good to use. In the drift, we don't really need the filter because we've got like a really good filter in the drift working for us. Phase flanger, I think, would be great. So let's have one of those over onto the drift. Back over here, then we could also have like an OTT. I think most people who like dirt and distortion would be very familiar with that. Let's have a raw. Let's have saturator. Let's have amp. So now we're going to polish the sound further, right? We'll have redux. Now going to start working on the effects side of it. We'll have an echo, bit of glue compressor, the reverb. What I should have done would have been a lot quicker is racking those together, but that's fine. Okay, so we're back over here on the drift we've been working on, and we've got this so far. Okay, so the blue clip is the one that we've been working on so far to get that sounding the way we want. So phase flanger, great one for getting some movement into this bass. But I think I would start out of all these effects, like in what order would I sort of begin with them? I'd kind of have amp, redux, saturator, and kind of raw in here to start with. And so if we want redux, we're going to bring in some sort of like crunch. So if noise is important to you, then Redux is a good candidate to bring in some of that lo-fi and some of that sort of bit crushing crunch. Let's just make sure when we're doing this, we're going to do good healthy practices here and look at the input versus the output. And we're going to make sure that if we're adding lots of gain, we're going to make sure that we turn that down. But that's fine. We didn't really add gain. It's pretty equal, as you can see, either side of the device. So that's great. Let's bring a saturator. Well, let's do amp next. I'm just going to bring the volume down on the track a little bit. Probably the bass makes the most sense. Yeah, that's quite nice. But you can obviously go through all of these, depending on what you're looking for. Because if you want nasty, amp's one of your friends. I quite like the bass. Same thing. It is a bit louder coming out of there, so we're just going to bring the volume down a little bit. Keep our gains. It's probably around 8. So look at that. Still slightly louder. Doesn't matter if we creep it a little bit, but we don't want to creep it too much, right? So this is good. If you're not familiar with doing gain staging or good healthy practice, what we're looking at here is what's coming into the amp, what's coming out, and we can see on these meters, thankfully Ableton made them bigger, we can kind of see that we're adding gain, right? I can hear it also with my ears if I just don't look at the screen and I turn things on and off. Okay, so maybe less redux as well. So it's just adding a bit of that kind of noise, doesn't have to be crazy. Now, depending on what version of Ableton Live you're working with, if you've got Suite, you've got this fantastic device called Raw, and this is your saturation distortion plugin of dreams. And if you don't have that, then you may well be working with the saturator over here, which is also a very, very tasty device. So if we look at saturate and we do that first, just for those of you who may not be working in Suite, we can mess around with the different saturation engines here. And I think the bass shaper is a good one when it comes to bass. So let's just work with that one today. And what we can do is drive it, of course. And then we can play around with this amount low over here if we want. So that needs some serious volume adjustment, as you can see. So whenever you use something like a saturator, then you're already expecting to bring the output down almost the same amount as you've driven it. But again, you use your ears. So I went too far. That's good. So we can go back up. A little bit more. That's good. And sometimes with the signal flow, you might want to try moving these around. Maybe like the saturator before the amp, or the amp before the redux. There's no rule. Yeah, that's my favorite on that combination. If you're working with Raw, you can switch that saturator off and then you can go into Raw and we've got a lot more possibilities here. So Raw now defaults to opening to this particular page here, which is giving us a multi-band saturation and distortion. So it splits very nicely for us the bands of frequency into low, mid and high. So we can actually distort and saturate those bands independent of each other. We've also got all the different engines of saturation per band. It's crazy, really. Modulation of those, filters of those. So lots and lots of possibilities there, along with the feedback engine. Yeah, Raw is going to be another level on that if we wish. So let's just do a bit of basic Raw work. So I'm just kind of messing there a bit with the different engines of the feedback, just showing you that with Raw in itself, we're not doing a masterclass on Raw today. We're kind of doing drum and bass and dubstep patterns using Ableton Live instruments. So this drift patch has started from zero, started from scratch. We've got it to where it is, and then we've started adding these effects. But Raw is amazing for, you know, bringing that saturator, but to more possibilities with it. If you are live with me in the stream, do let me know, by the way, if the music levels and mic levels are all good, and if you've got any questions, fire them in the chat. So phaser flanger, that's going to give us a nice bit of movement on this sound. And I must point out something I didn't do back on the synth, actually. Let me just turn these off for a second. And let's just go back to the synth and let's just look at the mode as well, which would be a further option. I pretty much changed a lot of it to customize the patch, but let's just play here for a second. Because if I go mono, I can actually change the mono voices of the synth a bit. That can get kind of interesting in itself. Could also make it a bit more of a stereo bass. And that might be perfect if you're looking for this to be a bit of a wider, kind of more mid bass, and you're going to layer it with a beautiful, lovely, clean sub underneath it. That could be perfect. So you might go for a bit more stereo width here. I think it started at 10%. So you might just have a little bit of it. One thing you want to do though is if you start pushing that is we could do a little bit of a mixing check here. So we could go into our audio effects in the browser of Live here, grab a utility, let's grab the mono utility. And we could also use here a little bit of a visual display so we can kind of see what's happening for a second. Let's use Isotope's imager here so we can kind of see what our bass looks like. So it's okay if it starts to dip below this 0 here a lot. It won't mono very well, but I've got the stereo only a small amount here. So if I push this higher, we'll probably get more phase. Yeah, eventually you can push it down into this area here. And if you're using plugins like this and you understand what this is telling you, it's actually telling me, it's giving me a really good clue that when it's this wide, it's not going to mono very well. So if I put it now into mono, where are we? Let's put that after here. It's going to be quite thin. Whereas if I bring this down a little bit, just a quick mixing tip. And we keep things up in this area here. Of course, it sounds different in mono, that's normal, but it's a lot more equal between mono and stereo now. So that's just a little bit of a mixing tip for you. So if you do choose to use this stereo mode on the drift, then you want to check things like how's it going to mono. So let's go back to polyphonic, leave it as it is, and let's get our effects on. And let's have a bit of drums. And let's bring phaser in because that's going to give us a nice bit of movement anyway. We can bring the amount down a bit. Move the frequency around. Move the number of notches. So similarly, you know, if we're looking back at this device again, our ozone imager, you can see that that phase is bringing all that stereo width, right? Pretty dope. Let's have it at 2 notches, frequency pretty okay where it is, maybe up a little bit higher. I like it kind of lower. So if we move the spread, you can see it can also affect that kind of stereo-ish side of it again. We could also add feedback. And we could also, over here, this is a little tip, and it's actually the reason I opened up this side of the phaser flanger, because over here, I can actually come over to here, and in the envelope follower section, play around a bit with the envelope, and that means similarly to like what envelope 2 is doing over here in the drift, it's doing lots of modulation and control. We can use the envelope follower to kind of make this move in a similar kind of way. So now you can see here it's just doing its own thing, but if we make it follow the envelope of the sound, it's now grooving. That's a good little tip there. So I'm going to move saturator out the way, or actually let's just do a shootout for a second. That's nice, but I'm going to stick with raw. That gave me a lot more options. And then finally maybe a bit of OTT. But with OTT, I think one thing you have to watch out for, because I see lots of people, what would we call them, delinquents, throwing these on tracks left, right and center. One thing that you might find if you do like what we've just done here is it sounds better without it, but also you might want to turn off the low part of the OTT, the compression part. Like just switch it off, and you might want to adjust the range between the range between the high and mid then. So the high water frequency is the goalpost or the boundary of the OTT working, and it's currently very low. So let's bring that up. Just going to go backwards a bit on a step or two here. Just going to bring the amount down. Dry wet. So now it's kind of like, I think, working. Smoothing out the sound, right? It's obviously softer and quieter, but it's kind of smoothing it out. But it's up to you. You don't have to use OTT, you don't have to use an multi-band, but I think a bit of compression here would be nice. So if we switch off the OTT and we grab the glue compressor instead, you turn that on and we just still have a bit of compression. And what's interesting is, as I said, if you look along here, you can kind of see the gain. And we did raise it a bit in the raw and the phase flanger. So both of those could be trimmed down a little bit. Through the feedback here. Yeah, that's balanced that a little bit. And then the glue compressor is actually slightly quieter, so it could have a little bit of makeup going to finish off this sound. Nice. So that is a very, very workable drift growl, dubstep, drum and bass, flexible bass patch. So what I would probably do in my own workflow is I'd pop over to my user library. I've got lots of folders and things over here, and I would actually just drag this in. Obviously, if I'm saving a project, I would save the project with this, but I can turn this into my own drift bass. And I'm going to drag it at the MIDI clip, because that means I'll get an ALC file and I'll get a preview. And so now there I've preserved everything on this track, and I could drop this into another project and work on it. And because I dragged it from the MIDI clip, not from the top of the track, I've got a preview. So if I click on this, I can listen back. Whereas if I drag it from here, I do the same thing, I preserve everything, but it becomes a .als over here, just a little tip again, and that means that it's all preserved and everything's fine, but I will not get a preview. So there's a little tip for you there. If you want that preview, drag the MIDI clip and then you'll get an ALC file. So I'm pretty happy with this drift. Let's say that I'm just going to tweak finally the synth a little bit, and then I'm going to show you the next steps. And let's also have just a little bit of reverb on here, so we can bring that over either before or after the compressor. Just a gentle bit of reverb to give it a nice little bit of room feel. Bring the dry wet right down. If you don't want as much of that tail, then you need to bring the decay down or the dry wet. You don't want it as spacey as it currently is, right? I like it before the compressor, so again, I'm always moving things around to check the signal flow, make sure it's doing what I want it to do. It doesn't mono too bad at all, so it's reasonably compatible, and it's got some width as well. So what we could start to do is we've got this track over here called Rec In, and what we could do over there is arm that track and then make sure that it's going to listen to the drift. So we're going to set it to listen to drift number 4 over here, because we've got our original demo drift that we started with before we started working on this new patch here. So let's call this, actually do a bit of housekeeping. Don't be shy as well. Feel free to drop in the chat there any questions you might have or any thoughts. We're going to be working on some more bass patches in a moment, but this is what we've ended up with from working with drift from scratch. So if you're joining the video now and you missed all the build up, we've worked so far to make drift from 0 into what we've got. So now let's record a bit of this into this Rec In track. We can adjust it in real time. Yeah, that's kind of fun. And it's kind of exploring all the different possibilities that can come out of this drift patch, right? And the effects that we've added to it. So we've now got this kind of mud pie, as we might call it. So let's maybe bring that over into the arrangement view and drop it on this rec in track. What we might actually do is drop it on its own track. So we'll just drag it down, put it on its, not there, on that. Let's go all the way down there. Great. So we're just going to name this now the drift. So we'll come back to an idea for that in a little bit. Let's now grab another synth and I'll walk you through how that one can work as far as building drum and bass and dubstep patches just with Ableton Live stuff. Again, do we need to buy Serum? Do we need to buy Pigments? Shout out to Dr. Bones Tunes who suggested this stream. He said he can't afford Serum or Pigments, and this is a good example of you can make professional basses with Ableton Live. And by the way, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to push all those buttons. It helps the channel a lot. Feel free also to visit the YouTube community tab on my page, and as I said, the thread is still open. Make suggestions for the next video. I'm going to hopefully do some more during December. I'm thinking about the 12 days of Christmas, the 12 streams of Christmas or something like that, getting stuck into some live streams. There was a second suggestion of groovy techno from scratch. That's going to happen 100%. So if you've got something, put it in the chat. All right, so drift I'm done with for now. Now what we're going to do, we're going to move our note over with the pitch bend on, and we're going to drop it onto Wavetable, onto Operator. And so we're going to use the same note, and we might as well bring our pitch bend over it as well, because that's kind of part of how this sounds. We'll just make sure that's connected okay. And so we'll pop into here and see. We'll have to do that again. So maybe I can copy the envelope from here, no doubt. Okay, I'll save a little bit of work because I just did that by ear before, but it's fun. So Wavetable, I keep saying, but that's not what we're going to do. We're going to do now the Operator, which is a bit of the OG of making bass and bass sound design, particularly for these genres, right? So the drift is nice because it's quite easy to look at the structure of it and understand what's going on. Operator sometimes can be a bit intimidating, right? It's a great sounding synth, but it doesn't look perhaps quite so easy to navigate your way around. So what we're going to do is do exactly that. We're going to build something cool out of here. Drums are just for context, by the way. So Operator. What's kind of unique about Operator is it does 3 types of synthesis. It's already a weapon because of that. Many synths, they're just capable of 1 type of synthesis. Operator basically has this traffic light system along the top here. And if you look at the far left and the far right traffic lights, they give us a lot of clues about what's happening with the 4 oscillators we have here. So our 4 tone engines, A, B, C, and D, by default, they're in the vertical traffic light, and that means that their A, B, and C don't have any volume by default. But if we start turning these on, it means we get FM synthesis, and the frequency of one oscillator modulates the frequency of the other. And so B, if we make it audible, starts modulating A. So we've got FM with the traffic light like that. If we go over to the right, we turn the synth into a subtractive synth, and it can be all in parallel, horizontal. So all of these oscillators become one. They're not modulating each other, they're just joining up together to make that sound, right? So it's a powerful synth, but there's a 3rd type of synthesis we can do with it, which is going to be really interesting for what we're looking at now. So if we turn on our bass note, and we keep it in the traffic light, like so. If I do just subtractive, we don't notice much difference. And if I change this to a square, I'm now layering a square with a sine wave. That's all I'm doing, but it's all in parallel. They're all joining together as one sound. But we're going to undo that. and we're going to go to the default traffic light, and we're going to start with FM synthesis. And so now when we turn this one up, oscillator B, it's now modulating oscillator A. And if we move the coarse knob, we start to get that kind of FM, classic FM sound, which is great for bass lines. And there's many dubstep drum and bass lines and bass sounds that are coming from FM synthesis. So let's do again a little bit like the drift, starting from 0. We're just going to set this up so that everything's kind of more or less pretty basic and straightforward. With oscillator A, I want to just check the envelope. It's pretty good. I'm going to bring the release in a little bit like so. And I'm going to start with that. Great. And what I'm going to show you is that third synthesis type that operator can do. And if we look at the oscillator tab, we've got this section here. And when we hover over it with the mouse, we get the pencil tool. And so we can draw in here, just like this. And so what we're actually doing is drawing our very own custom waveform in here. And that's called additive synthesis. And so if we put it back as a sine, you can see that the single sine only has one harmonic. And if you start going through some of these different wavetables, the different shapes here, you'll start to see that some of them have a lot more harmonics, right? And that's what they are actually designed to do. So sine 4-bit and 8-bit eventually has a little bit of some extra harmonics than the fundamental, but not a lot more. So what we're going to do is draw in here, and we're going to make our own frequency waveform here, our own harmonics. Something like that. And we can change also, we can flick through in here, like this is the most detailed harmonics we can add in additive synthesis in operator, is the 64 tab here. 64 harmonics we're playing around with. Then we can do 32, so we can bring it down, and 16 if you like. And you can also right click in here and bring up a menu, and essentially you can go deeper. You can have just only even harmonics showing, where when you draw in here you will only be able to do that. So let's go maybe backwards there. And so now you can see it's just pulling up the evens if I have that on, or odds, and then I can just draw only the odd frequencies. So you can kind of play around with that as well, or you can have all and then you get odd and even. I'm not going to do a masterclass today on harmonics, overtones and odd and even, but worth looking into that if you get deep into synthesis. So let's come back to maybe 64, and I'll redraw my shape, because these are the bass harmonics and frequency down here, these low ones, and then we're going up in frequency. Okay, so that could be interesting, and you can flick through. So these remove harmonics, right? So they get a little bit smaller, tighter scale, but I like 64 the most. It's giving me the most detail there. So we've got now an additive custom waveform here. And what we're going to do is we're going to add FM, we're still going to do FM synthesis using our own custom waveform. So we're going to modulate that custom waveform with oscillator B. Let's change its envelope. Move the coarse tuning. And then we can do the same in here. We can go into here. So we're actually now got FM synthesis going on by oscillator B modulating A, but we're now got two custom waveforms doing the lifting instead of sine waves and square waves and all that good stuff that we're familiar with. So this gets more and more unique and more interesting by working with it this way. Okay, maybe start somewhere nasty like that. Okay, what else can we do in the oscillator tab? Well, if we look here, we've got this little section which is interesting when you start messing around with your own waveforms, drawing in this additive synthesis. We'll just double check, because I believe, like, I'm just going to grab another operator and throw it over here. I just want to check something. So in there, if you look at the sine wave, for example, we don't have this repeat section active. It's all grayed out, right? So it only applies to a custom waveform. So when we've got this custom waveform, we've got repeats over here, and you can mess around with this, and this changes again the brightness of these overtones and harmonics here. So it's worth playing around with that as well. So let's have a listen. Turn off B for a second. Quite different. Wow. So super low and rumbly on those bigger numbers, and in the smaller numbers, it's kind of doing little repetitions of loops. It's more, again, crunchy. And so, well worth playing around with that when you're messing around with your own additive synthesis oscillators, right? So let's go to B and do the same. Nice. And similarly to the drift, we could also take away volume velocity here and make these sort of zeros. So we've got a constant velocity going on. So that's the main oscillator side of the synth. We're definitely going to come back and mess around with the coarse tuning of oscillator B in a moment. But the main sort of work in here, maybe the ADSR as well, is always going to change the sound a lot. So right now we've got very similar envelopes on both, but we might tweak those a little bit. Filter we're going to mess around with a lot in a second. And if you look at the global shell, I'm sure many of you know this, but the time here is essentially affecting all of the envelopes. So if we mess around with the time, if we go in this direction, it shortens all the envelopes that we've got wherever inside of the operator. And if we go this way, we're kind of lengthening them. So we can have a quick listen. Probably not huge change, because we don't really have any plucky envelopes at the moment with the stain down and the decay in play. So there's not much action there, but if we start changing those, this will affect those envelopes, as I said, bringing them smaller and tighter or lengthening them. So worth playing around with that. Let's get stuck into the filter though, because we're working on this sound. Here's the envelope. Here is the envelope amount here. So we could maybe start with a bit of filter envelope, opening and closing the cutoff. And then let's get the shaper on. And you'll generally find here, I would say my favorites is going to be likely to be the hard shaper, filter shaper, but you can also play with all of them. So let's say soft, and let's put some drive in. So we've got 9 dB drive. Yeah. Sine's quite nice. And 4-bit gives us some noise there if you're really looking for that kind of extra noisy quality to it, right? So just messing around with that filter has now given us a lot of juice in here. Can again play with the envelope, play around with the drive, and if you want extra filth in here, And let's go to the filter type. Let's bring in the Oscar or the MS-20. That means we can drive more disgusting stuff in here. Let's be honest, who doesn't like a bit of disgusting, filthy, dirty basses, right? You can also go negative direction on your envelope if you like. You can also mess around with its shape. If you want it more open. So nice. Again, we've got a really good platform we're working with here. No effects yet, so we always know, just like the drift, we kind of started with it very raw and basic, right? So we go back, have a quick listen to the drift. We know we've got this. And that was, you know, working super nice before we put all the effects into play. So we're going to add effects to this, but I always like to get the synth as far as you can before you start doing that. Remember, it's a lemon, squeeze all the juice out of it first. So we've got a nice platform again. Now let's say we could bring in a pitch envelope as well. And we could see where we're applying that to. So if we want one of these A or B, let's say, to have a bit of like really plucky kind of attack to it. So let's turn off B for a sec. Oh, hang on, let's go back here. I'll try it on B actually. Yeah, you get that little snap. But we're not going to hear anything when we take away A. So pitch envelope worth playing around with if you'd like a little bit of snappiness. You can also mess around with that, so lots of fun to be had there. We could also spread this sound a little bit, just give it a little bit of width. All right, so now let's get a bit of wobble into this. So we're working along nicely, we've got our pitch envelope in, so maybe now, actually, if we play with the time, yeah, now we get more reaction. The reason for that is because we've now got ADSR on our oscillator A, ADSR on oscillator B. They're not reacting a lot to that time parameter, but our pitch envelope is and our filter envelope is. So they're connected to that, and so now you also have this in play. So now let's bring an LFO in. And the question is, do we want it on the oscillators like it is now? You can turn off B and C and D. Let's put it in high. So that can get pretty nasty in there, because when you're looking at Ableton's operator and you're looking at the LFO section and you're looking at the modulation options, we've got this high rate and ability to change it from low to high on the rate. Also note synced, but that's not so interesting for me here. But the high is because we can get the LFO moving so quickly on the sound that it kind of gets almost like a tone, a pitch. So you can work between those two, changing how the rate and the amount are behaving. And we could also go, instead of the oscillators here, we could also go straight with the LFO on the filter. So it's wobbling this. Yeah, I think I'm going to keep it on the filter for now. I'm happy with how I could shape the oscillators without the LFO, but this destination B is really interesting. So my LFO can go elsewhere. This is where operator's such a deep and powerful synth. So in here, we can look at all this beautiful menu and decide what might be like the LFO also to work in its B section. And I'm going to go FM drive. We're using FM synthesis here. So now I can use destination B, so this LFO is also affecting the drive and FM of this synth. And you can see here we've got an amount of that, so if you don't want 100% you can go elsewhere. You can even go negative values, so that's kind of quite interesting as well, right? So let's use the drive in there. Yeah, nice. That's that sound we're looking for. So I think what we're going to do here again is we're going to start making another mud pie. We've already moved our recording of the drift over here. So let's say on the rec in track, we're going to set it to listen to the operator. Let's get that in there. It's in, we're going to arm it. And we're just going to hit record, and while we're messing around, that's all going to be being captured over into here. So let's do that. And we'll just leave that running. That's actually really cool for the rhythm. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So now let's say we take a stop there for a second. That's another great little bit of a mud pie here. So we're going to give that another dedicated track down there. And again, that was without kind of any effects, right? So all we're doing there is capturing kind of the outputs of the operators. So now what we want to do is do exactly what I'm thinking to do now, which is build the rest of this patch out into its full finished product. So again, we're going to have phase flanger. This time I'm going to do this a little bit more efficiently. So I'm literally going to put all of these in a rack and make my life a lot easier. And then we're going to just option drag one of those onto the operator track. And actually we're also, I wanted to show you this. So we're also going to take a shaper MIDI and bring that over as well onto there. More on that in a sec. We'll put that over there. We'll take a look at that in a sec. Okay, so now we're going to just finish off this patch here, turn it into something really nice and filthier. It's already pretty filthy. So again, I'm going to sort of put these, drag them around now into a bit of the order that I might sort of use them in signal flow wise. So we'll have redux, amp, saturator up into there, the raw, and phase flanger sort of comes later, reverb comes later, OTT maybe somewhere in there, raw and echo, all these movement ones like moving left and right or giving it some space, they can come at the end and then we compress it at the end to make it kind of nice and tight. So here we go. Let's try some redux. And if you're just joining this video now, don't forget to gain stage things. So if we're adding volume along the way, we're going to be taking that away. That's not the aim of the game here. Just thinking to change the bass patch for a second, just for a little bit of changing of our ears. So I deliberately picked also one of these amps that's quite kind of gnarly, so it's giving us a lot more gnarlier crunch. Okay, so if you want a cleaner sound, you can turn those things off, right? So let's go again with raw. So we need to bring the output down quite a bit there. We've boosted a lot. A little bit more. Same with the OTT, watch out for it being destructive more than good. So we're going to turn off the low end and we're going to bring the range of the frequency bands higher. So it's working between a different band. It seems to me to sit a lot better when it's about 50%. Let's get another record going actually. Okay, let's add a bit of spatial effects. Let's start with our phase flanger again. Bit of envelope follower. If you want a wobble bass, bit of reverb. So the only thing with racking these effects actually is I kind of lose the side of it that I want to see, which is the gain staging. So it's interesting. Putting them all in a rack is very efficient, but we actually lose the little gain staging, which is quite handy when you're doing a real signal flow like this. We can now see between each the chain of the volume as it goes along. And we can kind of see what we're ending up with here compared to where we started with, right down here. So we know where we've increased it a lot. It's kind of from the amp onwards, right? Which I'm okay with. It's not like we've gone crazy anywhere that we need to fix too much. Maybe the phase flanger into a little bit. A bit more. Or we can leave that and we'll just bring the feedback down a little bit. Better. Let's record some of it. I didn't even realize I wasn't messing around with the LFO shape either up here, by the way. And this, similarly to the drift, can be very interesting, especially sample and hold on the oscillator. Here we go. So just playing around with this patch, lots and lots of fun. You see a grown man having a lot of fun. So we've got a couple of mud pies again over here in this rec-in track. It's worth, if you're going to do what I'm doing, I'm deliberately doing it, that you kind of mess around a lot and you make sure you're grabbing and recording those. And I'm going to wrap things up today by showing you why, especially with these ones that are looking really good down here, where we've kind of pushed the operator patch into pretty wild territories. And if we go in and look at those, you know, there's lots of kind of good kind of harmonics inside of there, like really strong waveforms with lots of good stuff that's just happened from all that kind of wobble stuff. So those earlier drift ones are interesting as well, but I can guarantee you these operator ones, that this mud pie or this capturing what I've just been doing is going to be really useful shortly. So coming back to the operator, what I want to show you now, which I think is a really cool thing. So we've got these couple of MIDI clips we've been messing around with, which is like a little bass riff that has this pattern notes, and then we've got just a single note with the pitch bend on it. So we've got kind of so often if you're producing in these kind of styles, you're going to do lots of automation and modulation, especially of things like I've been simulating it a lot, grabbing this filter frequency and wobbling it, right? So there's lots of modulation, lots of things going on in the patches, but we're not kind of globally, let's say, taken over that. Even though we've got LFOs and things maybe modulating around this frequency cutoff, we're not kind of taking over that frequency knob and maybe automating it like we might do in a track. Similarly with our drift patch that I built at the start of today's stream. So if you're just joining now, we've built 2 patches, professional bass sounding sound design without Serum, no pigments. We're just kind of showing you here, that's what I'm trying to do today, thanks to Dr. Bones' tune suggestion, that you can grab Ableton Live instruments. And you might think, why bother? You know, there's lots of presets and I can just go and buy that synth. Well, maybe you don't have the budget for that. And sitting right under your nose is plugins that are capable of really, really strong and great sounds. And the good thing is, like, I wasn't born knowing how these things worked, right? I spent a lot of hours messing around with them till I got them to sound how they wanted. And so the learning process during that means I can kind of sit down and make my own sounds from zero, put them in my tracks, and you don't sound like everybody else that has those presets and buys those synths for the presets. So I'm sure some of you will think, why bother? It takes too much time. But trust me, if you want to have a unique and distinct sound in this world of electronic music, this is exactly the way you're going to find it, learning your plugins, learning the effects and learning the instruments. All right, enough of me ranting there, but here's our drift patch to remember what that sounds like. Okay, so here's the idea. What we're going to do is we're going to now unveil what this shaper MIDI can do, because this is like, if we're not in a track here at the moment, you know, automating the clips and the filter frequency cutoff, which we could do. We can go and perhaps go over into the arrangement view, and we can do it inside the clips as well. We can go into the envelopes here and we can grab the filter frequency, which is the last thing I clicked here, and we can do this. And we can make it wobble a lot across the clip, right? And do all sorts of fun stuff, and get it to talk, you know, in ways that it's not currently, and make these really fast, make them interesting and curved and all that kind of good stuff. So you start to get that wobble in the clip via automation, or on the track if you're doing this in the arrangement view potentially, and not only in the clip. Here it's inside the clip, it's clip automation. And now it's taking So we could do it that way, but my idea here is to do it a little bit differently. So instead of that, let's actually just make a bit of room here. We'll copy that clip down, give it a new color, the one that we just kind of changed. And then we'll go back to the original one, and in this envelopes here, we're going to pull that back up and find our way. We could just say show adjusted only. Okay, hang on. Am I on the right clip or the wrong clip? That would be the question. Okay, there we go. Great. So I'm going to clear that envelope here. So that one's back to without, and this one has with. And then with the one without, what we're going to do is we're going to use the shaper MIDI device. This is a brilliant device, and so we can turn that on and we can map it to things. And so what we're going to do is we're going to map it to the cutoff of the frequency here, and we're going to let it do some of the lifting about making this kind of, again, more interesting from that point of view. And we're going to change the shapes in here, and we'll start with maybe the furthest one on the right. So now we've got this movement on the cutoff of the frequency, and we can still haven't taken it over completely. We're in mod mode, so we can still adjust our frequency cutoff. But what we can do now is come over here and we can play around with this pattern by, for example, we could turn on looping. And now we get this beautiful it's looping depending at the moment on the rate of this macro down here. So this is where shaper becomes really interesting, because we've got this kind of custom shape here that's moving that filter cutoff in this custom shape, and we can build our own and we can toggle through these ones that give us a good starting point. But over here, a lot of magic happens. So we can turn on loop, and the loop is looping depending on this rate. And so we get this kind of like really cool rhythm pattern that's going on. So there's that. And then we've got echo. So we can kind of set up like notes in between. So if we take looping off, we go back, we've got a gap between the notes playing, right? But if we go to echo, we kind of make it continue between the different notes. And then you can play around with offsets. Velocity, how dynamic they are. So I really love this because you start to get some very, very interesting kind of rhythmical modulation in here. Again, we should be recording this. Let's toggle through. Let's make our own. Crazy. So essentially, do not sleep on the shaper as a way to, and I'm just showing you the tip of the iceberg. I like to, this is a pure sound design session today, making bass patches for dubstep and drum and bass. And we've built one from scratch in Drift and one from scratch in Operator. But this is a great way to bring modulation and custom shapes. So you can see down here, you can also randomize it. Amazing. You could save this, obviously, if you get a shape that you really like. But also we can map it to other things. So right now I was just scraping the tip of the surface because I mapped it to the filter frequency, but I could also open this up and I could start mapping it to other locations here, oscillator A's, volume, the coarse tuning. And so in terms of, again, finding your own sounds, that's kind of a bit of the goal here today. This opens doors and possibilities, like both the Drift, both the Operator have shown that Ableton Live's very capable of making really good bass sounds, and messing around with lots of the parameters and the effects, we can kind of really create thousands of different versions of these basses. And it's not about the MIDI and it's not about the pattern, it's about all of this sound design, the synths, the effects, these modulation devices. So the shaper is, I think, awesome for what you just saw. It's a way to kind of have this like extra set of hands that's moving things around. And again, maybe our goal is to make mud pies, so we're recording into audio and we're going to use the bass eventually in audio. That's absolutely fine for me. I don't need to keep it in MIDI in the instrument. Maybe all of my bass lines today come from what I've recorded here, all these different clips. So I could turn these into take lanes or work with it in audio and build a lovely bass from all of that good stuff. So last but not least, what I want to show you is what I think also is great about these mud pies, as they're affectionately known. And that is what we can also do. So we're just going to do a bit of cleanup here. And let's move that right over there. And what we're going to do is, we've had this Wavetable sitting here for a while, and Wavetable is another excellent, obviously, synth in Ableton's locker, and it does for sure amazing bass lines. And we have all these brilliant wavetables, especially ones that are good for things like drum and bass and dubstep, sort of, complex waveforms that have like, lots of kind of nuanced details in them. So more actually if you get out of the basics and into distortion. So you've got all of these waveforms in here, and I'm sure many of you are very familiar with these, right? If you're working with Wavetable for a long time, you might even be slightly bored with them because you're very familiar with which ones are which, and you have your favorites, but you're looking for something else. So the idea here with this MudPie is, drum roll please, is we go into here and we have a bit of a look. And I think in some of these locations like here, we've got kind of some really kind of cool harmonics going on from the MudPie. So I'm going to option drag that down again to some clean space. And let's just take a couple like so, and maybe something else, just random, not really paying much attention at all, other than I can see where the waveform's a bit denser and it's a bit more choppy and rhythmic, but we'll try some and see what happens. So we'll also maybe take something from up here. Let's do a height change on the track here. That will be enough in a second. Let's have a drift one as well from up there. So there's a bunch of clips from within these MudPies. I'm going to then bring them over and let's drop them over here somewhere. And let's get another color in so we're not getting confused. Bring those over and bring them right next to the wavetable. And so now what we're going to do is drop these in to here, just like that. And we've now, all of that MudPie goodness is going to give us our own beautiful kind of harmonic wavetable. So we're kind of resampling. And to be honest, you could even go into these and do further resampling of them. That is, we could change this from beats to tones or texture and mess around with the grain size. Like, again, just showing you possibilities here, not the final answer because there's no rules, but we're now going into Wavetable with our own custom patch, custom waveform that we've made from those MudPies. So if we hit the drums on, this is Wavetable 1, right, that we've dropped in there. Let's try some of the others. That's the same one, sorry. And where this will really shine, there you go, is when we put it up somewhere here in the middle of the wavetable and we give it a bit of maybe LFO. And some of these will work better than others. There we go. So we could use that, and we can now start again, but this time with Wavetable, with a whole new fresh waveform that we didn't have before, right? And so that was clip 3, this is clip 1. And as you can see, we're building our own versions of what we know comes bundled here with live. So instead of, leaning on these that we have known maybe, as I said, all the time, right? And some of these will get a little bit closer to what we're working with, the distortion ones, and complex as well, some of those. So I definitely have some favorites in here. Plastic Shimmer is a good one. So you can start to see that waveform, and then you look at what we've got over here. We've got pretty cool kind of waveform, right? So interesting. This is the one for me, I think. And then we can start setting it up in Wavetable. Now what I'm starting to do is take our new interesting waveform that I've built today, dropped into here. I'm now layering it with an analog waveform here of square wave. I'm bringing the square wave down a bit in volume. Lots of possibilities. So we're starting with a custom wavetable workflow built from all the good stuff we did in operator and drift, right? So detune them a little bit from each other. Got a bit of movement on there. Let's make this a low cut. Bring up the resonance. Let's make this one a high cut. So you can just start getting in here, and the beautiful thing about this one, as I said, is it's all being built from our own MudPy wavetable that we created over here. We started grabbing all that messing around with the drift and the operator, and what it's done is opened a whole new door over here. So there's been this kind of workflow to come around here and start with our own brand new wavetable over here, built from that, which I think is great. And then I'm starting to layer it with oscillators, just a basic analog shape here, but you can obviously bring in all of these. You could actually add another one of our recordings into here, and then I'm sort of messing with the filters and starting to mess with the envelopes in here to get this into its own kind of unique bass. Just walking you through, lots of options here. So maybe as a final one, we haven't used it yet today in sound design, but an echo could be a fun one here, just on the wavetable, just to show you how you can sometimes use an echo to get another kind of tone in here. So if we pop an echo on this wavetable that we've got so far, I'm going to take it out of sync. Bring it round so it's quite short. We can get this really kind of nice metallic kind of tone out of it. Right? So we can boost the feedback a little bit, bring the left and right out in frequency and milliseconds in time right round. We can even unsync these. So maybe we can use a shaper here. And map it. Well, on that note, I'm going to wrap things up for today. I hope if you're either watching this back on replay or you've been with me during the stream that you've enjoyed it, you've found it beneficial, you've learnt lots of things. I know that unfortunately the commenter or the subscriber who suggested the stream, Dr. Bones Tunes, wasn't able to join us live, but I'm sure he'll enjoy it when it comes back to watching it back on replay. As always, a small favor I ask on the channel is if you did enjoy the video, please like, comment, subscribe, push those buttons. There is an active thread that led to this video on my YouTube community tabs where I do announcements there. You can follow and find that thread. There are 4 options. Drop a comment there, let me know what you'd like to see, and that could well become the next live stream that's purely a topic that you wanted to talk about. Hopefully this appeals to lots of you and is helpful, because I mean, I'm not a dubstep or drum and bass producer, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy making this sound design of those sounds, and I learn lots from it, like hopefully you guys and girls did as well. And this is all key, and I've said it a couple of times, to finding your own sounds. So again, maybe you think it's not worth doing and it takes too much time and all that kind of thing, but we've just proven that, I think, over a couple of hours, that Ableton Live and its built-in instruments and effects can give you that professional sound that you're looking for. And if you're like Dr. Bones Tunes and you don't have the budget to go buying Serum and Pigments, then look no further. Excuse me. And that was the idea of this stream. So just finally, as a last one as well, if you kind of want to perhaps take your learning journey with electronic music further and develop techniques to your own music and your specific sound, I do work one-to-one with DJs, artists, performers, producers on exactly this stuff. So instead of it being just any old topic, it's the topic that you want to learn about. There's a link in the description down below to book a free call with me where we can get into a chat and we can figure out if we're a good fit, and map out what your signature sound could look like. There's no pressure, it just starts with a conversation. So if that sounds interesting to you, click the link down in the description, and I'll see you all very soon. I'm planning to do, I think, as I said, the 12 streams of Christmas, something like that. So definitely we're on our way towards that. So thank you for tuning in and watching the stream. Keep on creating. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you all very soon. Heath home, over and out. Bye, everybody.